The Professionals Talk series is a series that we started last year as the Young Geographers group to get some young professionals and some students in the room with us, get them sharing their experiences, their perspectives in geography, and whatever our special topic is. For this evening, our special topic is urban planning. So we have three lovely young professionals here with us tonight to talk about their perspectives in urban planning and geography. And we've got some lovely people joining us online and in the room to be our audience. So it's my pleasure to welcome you all here tonight. I'd like to begin this evening by respectfully acknowledging the Aboriginal people on this land, the Turrbal and the Yagara people. I'd like to acknowledge their connection to land, their connection to the waterways and to the sky, and also acknowledge that we are planning and deciding the future of our land. And we need to be mindful, I suppose, that we're including people from lots of different perspectives and backgrounds in that decision-making process, the way that we plan our cities and our landscapes and the structures in which those are planned as well, need to be considerate of all the ways that people use land, people use cities, people use landscapes. And that's something that perhaps hasn't always historically, or definitely hasn't historically been the case. And I'm hopeful that some of our younger generation of planners coming through the ranks now are going to help take that into consideration a little bit more. I'd like to begin tonight by introducing our first speaker, Anne. Anne is an experienced researcher and holds a PhD in geography. She's currently transitioning her career to the field of urban and transport planning and works as a transport planner at Point 8. She's also very passionate and advocates for active transportation and is passionate about making Brisbane a pedestrian and a cycle-friendly community. In addition, she's also an executive committee member of two organisations, UQ Organisation of Planning Students, or UQ OOPS, which all of our three speakers tonight actually have in common, and also is in the Queensland Young Planners, which is a sub-branch of the Planning Institute of Australia. So I'd like to invite Anna to give her presentation.
First of all, thank you for this privilege and letting me speak in front of this esteemed audience about my career journey and planning. Yes. So I'm a geographer, hardcore geographer. Yes. So my content will be like geographer, and then why I'm a geographer, and then how I became a planner, why I choose to be a planner, and then the experience and responsibilities, and how planning looks like in India. I always believed in spatial analysis. Like, I love to do spatial analysis. I'm a visual person, so I see data through maps. So that's one of the main reasons I wanted to become a geographer. And I love to observe spaces. Spaces as in how human beings try to interact with the space they have, and then try to make place out of it. So that's one of my passion. I love to observe places, especially like I sometimes just go to Queen Street Mall and I just sit there and I just see how people are using the space. So, and third is my love for map. And the cartography. So these are the few things which motivated me to become a geographer. Okay, so geographer to planner. The place I come from is Delhi. If you guys know, it's in India. It's the capital of India. Delhi has two faces. When I was growing up, I have always seen two faces. One is absolutely beautiful, nice boulevards, like you can see here, and the other is absolutely unorganized space with a lot of slums and squatters. So my question, it always intrigued me, what makes these spaces so different? Like, why one space is so beautiful and why the other is not? Like, what factors goes inside, and what factors are there to make this kind of difference, you know? So finally, one more, when I was in masters, I went to for data collection purposes, I went to Chandigarh. It's a
exemplary work of Le Corbusier, built in 1952. That space, when I visited that place, I realized how much planning has to, how much planning can do with space to make it better. Yeah, so that was another connection point for me to become a planner. Yeah, and then I started realizing how geography and planning can be linked together. So what's the connection point? So there can be many connection points, but according to me, it's the space, place, and time, which connects the two disciplines together. Moving forward, my career experience, my career and the responsibilities, I have been involved with several projects, especially research, and then involved in land suitability analysis, transport modeling, and master plans. Master plan, I have been involved mostly in India. Master planning in Australia is very different from master plan in India. When we talk about master plan in India, it is basically the city plan they're talking about. It's a big land use plan of the entire city, which I find is, I will explain it later, is very redundant but then still it's going on in India. So yeah, these are all the responsibilities. I have been involved in map making through various GIS softwares, report writing, modeling, then field visit for primary surveys. So this is one of the examples. It's a very small example, but then how we can use geography in our daily life. It's a land suitability analysis. It's one of the first project that I did in the university while I was transitioning my career from geography to planner. And this fascinated me because how much geography I can use in this project was remarkable. And I was I used two land uses, and with the help of this criteria, I made this land suitability map, where you can see that the majority of the development that can take place is along the southern side, while in the northern side is for park protection, like not for development. So it's so easy to understand when you do such kind of land suitability analysis, and you get to know which land should be used for what purposes. So this is, I think, one of the finest example where we can use geography in planning. This is another master plan project in Jamshedpur. Jamshedpur is in the eastern side of India, and is one of the industrial town, you can say, industrial city, which has been exposed to a lot of planning experiments from you can say modernist planning, from modernistic planning to now post-modernistic planning. So a lot of experiments have been gone through this city. And again, we have analyzed the city's demography, demographic characteristics, natural resources, and we also conducted land use suitability for understanding which land is suitable for what. And we also try to bring in here the transit-oriented development, the concept of TOD for this city. So this is again one of the example of how we used geography in in planning, like developing a master plan. I firmly believe that since the quantitative revolution has come up in geography, and then now the geoinformatics, it has bring planning and geography very close through the GIS, the art of cartography, and the new techniques in surveys. So I believe these two paradigm shift has been a major contribution, which helped, you can say, planning a lot. Finally, how does planning look in India? So this table, you can see it's a table from 2011, and during that time, only 27.93% of the Indian cities had their master plan ready, like had their some kind of planning instruments. So it's just 27.93%. So planning in India, you can say, is almost missing. It is very, very sad when you look at the cities of India. It gives a very sad feeling of what actually happened after the independence. Immediately after independence, there was a lot of migration that took place, which resulted in haphazard urban growth. And on the other hand, there was the government after the post-independence, they were trying to put money into industrial development and agricultural development. So they missed this part. So when there is industrial development, it will bound to attract people. It attracted people, but inorganically, because there was no planning instruments in place. The places where industries started, the industries were started, those places started to grow inorganically, beyond imaginable. And the growth rate were like, if I show you the growth rate, it was amazing. Like, so that's what happened, so now if I say that India still follows a very comprehensive rational planning, which is still very modernistic and purely based on scientific analysis and all. I don't say this is wrong, but then you cannot make a plan for the entire city, which is one side, which has very beautiful, nice roads, and the other side, which is so inorganic. So you can't have a one size, fit for all. So you need separate plans to, I won't say separate plans, but one master plan cannot help, help the city. So, and of course, the planning is very technocratic and top-down approach, and strictly based on strictly zone-based planning. What I have read and understood, like Australia has gone through a lot of evolution from zone-based planning to performance-based planning, and now the Planning Act 2016. So Australia has kind of evolving through through phases, but then sadly in India, it is still strictly, modernistic and zone-based. And of course, lack of community consultation within the planning. I won't say lack, it's almost nil. It's missing from the planning process. So yes, these are the few things that, it saddens me, of course. But then yes, the reality is this. So yeah, that's where I end my presentation.
Alrighty, I'll introduce him while he grabs a glass of water. Our second speaker tonight is Alexander Moody. Alex is an urban planning consultant who graduated, oh no, what are we doing? John, why is our screen gone to sleep?
No idea, but it is available.
Alrighty, those online, you get the lovely show, and the rest of us in here will figure it out in a second. I'll keep rolling. So Alex graduated with a Bachelor of Regional and Town Planning from UQ in 2019. He was an executive member of the Organisation of Planning Students UQ OOPS as well for several years. Since then, he's worked in the world of private planning and has also gained experience in local consultancy as a graduate, all the way through to his current position at Urbis. Alex's experience with planning projects ranges from a number of areas, from small to medium scale residential developments, childcare centres and retail outlets, through to commercial, office development, towers, hospitals, mixed use precincts and greenfield planning. So it sounds like you've really done it all, Alex. I'm keen to hear from you.
So I suppose as a preface to my current position as a planning consultant, my background in geography and how I got to this moment in my life, geography has always been a passion of mine throughout school, but from primary school up to high school, and around the time that before I started university, when looking at what I wanted to do for a degree, I was encouraged by a family friend who was also a town planner to give this a crack, which is correct. Where I grew up to a lot of natural processes and areas. So having grown up, experienced everything from once the durations to crushing droughts, and everything in between. And as well as that, was lucky enough when I was young to travel around Australia, and then also opportunities overseas to see what it was like in other countries, which again further sparked my interest to pursue an area of geography and planning. So and then going to uni, of course, at least the degree at UQ covered quite a lot of areas of geography, of course, planning being plan making, areas in transport planning, urban design, community engagement, as well as a lot of environmental management courses to do with resource management, climate change, and of course, how they relate to planning, and of course, core geography subjects like demography, GIS, study of urban geography. And I was fortunate enough in my final year of uni to be able to do coursework to Hong Kong and Indonesia, where learning from the previous 3 years, 4 years of uni, I was able to take them to other areas of the world and learn more or practice those. And for example, the Hong Kong trip, learning about obviously Hong Kong being extremely constrained due to a lack of flat land to develop on. So looking at the adaptive planning processes from land reclamation to create more room to build, right through to the use of mountainous areas for critical infrastructure such as wastewater treatment. And on the other end of that, adaptive reuse of land. This photo from the Cologne shipyards in Macau. I believe the last ship that was produced from these shipyards was sometime in the 80s or 90s, and heritage listed, so it was protected, but then sort of exploring opportunities for how one day the site could be reused in a manner that sort of paid homage to its previous land use. And going to Indonesia, that's one of the first opportunities as a student planner to undertake community engagement work. So this was from Kampong, with some in Yogyakarta, which is along the southern coast of Java, and opportunities for community engagement workshops to address local planning concerns for this community. In addition to these workshop sessions, I was lucky enough to be able to do a lot of one-on-one interviews and surveys with residents, which again is a really enlightening experience, and something that around the end of my degree really sort of gave me a sort of goal for what I wanted to, the kind of work I wanted to do, eventually do in the future. And as well as that, I had the opportunity to do one of the coolest geography-based things I've ever done, which is hike a dormant volcano and get an amazing view of the world's most active, or Indonesia's most active volcano, Mount Merapi. I didn't get any of the photos of the volcano I hiked because it was pitch black trying to get up there before sunrise. And yeah, so professional experience. So prior to my role at Urbis, I was at a small planning firm called Peakland, based out of North Brisbane. Very small team, working predominantly on small scale residential stuff within Southeast Queensland, and then also in northern New South Wales. So got experience at different planning systems in different states, and they are very different. Predominantly new buildings, like new dwelling extensions, but then also a lot of work in Brisbane for traditional building character, which is something that's very sort of treasured and preserved by Brisbane City Council. So often that was a large area of my work, and worked with a sister company predominantly with building certified. So I also had exposure to the building processes outside of just the planning. And then from October 2021 to now at Urbis, and as Giselle mentioned at the start, worked across a number of sections in residential and health projects, as well as commercial, retail, and education. And again, varying scales from the small scale residential townhouse developments right up to commercial towers, greenfield planning. And over the course of the last 6 months, I've also had some experience doing community engagement and planning work, which is something that I hope to build on further as I continue my journey at Urbis. Current roles and responsibilities. So development assessment, DA report writing is pretty much my bread and butter. I'd say that it probably takes up about 60 to 70% of my work. And that's right through from getting a new proposal sent through from new or existing client, all the due diligence work leading up to that point, and assisting in creating concept designs for architects to use, pre-lodgement, and then right through to report preparing, lodgement to council, and then everything post-lodgement. On top of that, planning, research, and analysis. So again, more due diligence stuff, and this will range from everything from 1 to 2 page reviews of sites for development potential, right through to complex due diligence portfolios across multiple sites, several hundred pages of data. So it gets pretty intense. Project management and coordination, that's a sort of key time back to development assessment and DA work. Often we'll get engaged as part of our DA process to coordinate with architects, engineers, ecologists sometimes, you name it. And we often do a lot of that sort of role in the background to keep the process running smoothly. And again, client and stakeholder engagement as part of that, whether it's direct client engagement as part of progress updates for projects, or also community planning engagement as well. And yeah. And as a brief example for a couple of projects I've been involved with. So again, a relatively small townhouse development in Nunda, which is a recent approval. And here we have a childcare centre in Beenleigh, which although it seems pretty straightforward, one of the toughest DAs I've had to get approved due to Logan City Council adopting a new flood scheme about 3 days before I lodged. Again, an example in Leichhardt Hotel in Rockhampton. I couldn't find any demo plans, but this is an example of adaptive reuse, where the existing hotel is currently has a 7-story short-term accommodation aspect, which is dilapidated. So pretty much demolishing most of the site and then redeveloping to improve the existing hotel use on site. Hospital, so day surgery and oncology ward and dialysis centre in Noosa. This and one other project I'm currently working with called Ramsey Health. So health being quite an issue for Noosa at the moment. The current hospital only has about 95 beds and currently provides existing acute surgery and treatment for a relatively small hospital, and as a result, the emergency department of the existing hospital is on a daily basis on average 20-hour bypass for ambulances. So if you call 000 in Noosa, you're likely to end up in the Sunshine Coast University Hospital. Branded Village redevelopment, which this is one of the first projects that I was involved with at Urbis, and it was a relatively big jump going from back deck extensions right up to full-scale precinct redevelopment. But again, it was really interesting and the project to be part of, especially so early on in my time at Urbis. And 25 Mary Street, which again sort of came onto this project after it was already lodged with council. I was brought on pretty extensive information request where council essentially wanted to know more, as they often do. And this was again one that was a bit of a highlight reel for the last 12 months I've been at Urbis, which was my first tower DA and approval. I suppose to preface this question, how I use geography as a planner, I view planning as a bit of a jack of all trades profession. in the sense that geography at its core is the most important knowledge base you have, but then you also get a relatively loose understanding of a number of areas of engineering, architecture and design, to a degree, areas such as like environmental management and ecology, without having to lean too heavily on those as part of the actual job role. So, and then of course, there's the other aspects like people management skills, so project management, etc. So I suppose looking at it broadly, my involvement of how I use geography on a day-to-day basis is a marriage of human geography, physical geography, and technical geography. Sometimes, or most of the time, all interlinked in one way or another. So human geography, built environment, perhaps, or some would argue, probably the most prevalent thing that planners will look at, zones, and more zones. As Anne said before, planning these days in Australia is much more performance-based than it was 20 to 30 years ago. That doesn't stop zoning being a very prominent issue though, or prominent aspect of planning. For good reason though, you know, why we build where we build and why we can't build elsewhere, whether it's from established uses of areas. So obviously you don't want to go and do residential development in an industrial zone, and vice versa, you want to set up a factory in an existing neighborhood. But as well as that, it's useful in sort of earmarking areas for future development. So where you're looking at community expansion, it assists in sort of encouraging land reuse or expanding elsewhere. So greenfield development, for example. And then Brisbane as an example to that, can break it down further from the planning scheme broadly in zoning to the neighbourhood plans or local plans. And then within those local plans, you have precincts and sub-precincts. So particularly in Brisbane, quite a few layers in some places. But again, it's one of those tools that, although it can be a bit frustrating in trying to justify why you're doing what you're doing, or council don't agree with what you're doing because you're going against the intent of a local plan or a zone, ultimately it is there for a reason, which is to try and guide good development, no matter how much we argue that it is good and council do not. As an example of, like, particularly for built environment development, infill versus greenfield development, the balancing out between adaptive reuse of building or a site to provide for a new use or a higher intensity use. As a planner, that's always a good thing to do, but it is hard to do because in Brisbane there aren't always that many opportunities, whereas conversely, expansion or greenfield development where urban sprawl occurs, as a planner, generally not the best, but we have to accommodate increasing demands for housing and whatever into the future. And retaining existing built form and preserving residential community character. As I said earlier, Brisbane City Council loves traditional building character, commercial character, and rightfully so. On a personal level, I think being able to preserve that kind of character is something that really just paints the history of the city from its the last couple of hundred years. And another aspect of that is heritage. How do we promote new development that protects and frames heritage and significance, which thankfully we have heritage consultants at Urbis that do all that thinking for me. And an example of that is where, if you can see the image down the bottom, Jubilee Hotel in the Valley with the recent redevelopment or recent development of commercial office space cantilevered over the building. So clever use of inner city space to provide a high intensity use without, not only does it avoid damaging the Jubilee Hotel, but in a sense, it provides a bit of a frame to it as well. Physical geography, adapting and preparing for change. Obviously critical in understanding limitation constraints to development from hazards, flood, bushfire, landslides, coastal inundation, coastal erosion. As well as that, in terms of putting a limit to how much encroachment into significant areas of biodiversity or ecological importance. And And an example of that in recent years of where the government has sought to try and limit it more is introductions to protect koala vegetation more within Queensland to limit that kind of clearing. You know, looking at Brisbane's lessons from the past, maybe don't build in an area that floods. You know, hindsight is 2020. And part of that, I think, stems largely from at the time that Brisbane was established, when during the colonial period, the lack of knowledge for local conditions when it was first established. And so echoing what Giselle said earlier tonight, involvement and engagement with First Nations people can actually help in the planning process. At the time that Brisbane was established, you know, the First Nations people who lived in the area would have had generations of knowledge to know that the area floods when it rains a lot. And same again for areas that are subject to bushfire hazards over the years, cyclones, etc. But that's not to say that it's all limiting. In those lessons that have been learnt from several major floods over the last 50 odd years, there is the lessons in adaptability. So planning being used to sort of change the way we think about design and how we design, you know, buildings, infrastructure, delivery, etc., to adapt to the hazards. So within areas that flood, raise the buildings up. That's why every house that you see, or most houses you see in Rockley now, are all elevated to some degree. And again, on a finer level, at a sort of building level, that as well can help. That sort of planning insight can help improve engineering and building techniques. So less prevalent in Queensland is bushfire attack levels for buildings, but from my experience doing planning in northern New South Wales, if you're within an area that's within, you know, that's reasonably bushfire prone, but you could just be in grass, and like every development, whether it's a house extension or a new apartment building, had to go through some form of bushfire assessment to determine how prone they were, and then as a result, depending on the bushfire attack level, is subject to the building design standards to address that. And then finally, technical geography, GIS, pretty much the backbone of how a planner works every day. Almost every conceivable aspect of human physical geography can largely be mapped these days, particularly for areas like Brisbane, Logan, Moreton Bay, where they have quite a number of quite extensive documentation, recording, studies to help map all this stuff. Less prevalent in regional LGAs, just because lack of resources, but again, and then of course, going beyond that at state and national levels, it's also quite a big benefit. And having being able to use GIS to have a full understanding and appreciation of constraints or opportunities presented by the site zoning, the local planning parameters, and relevant overlays means that when we go back to our client to say, can you do this, yes or no, we can give them a definitive answer and we can tell them why. And it also means that if they don't heed our advice when we give them not good, or if we tell them that there's risks and they don't heed that answer, it also helps remove the liability of us a little bit. And then a big factor as well, and I found this particularly for some more recent projects we've been involved with, where we needed to support a proposal by demonstrating economic and social need, having the technical understanding of aspects such as local demographic profiles, you know, travel distances and parameters is something that is, I think, a lot of planners sort of seem to, well, the knowledge is there, but then it can be underutilized in a way. So the example I gave you earlier, the Noosa Hospital extension, is such an example where we've used a lot of demographic data to look at projections for future population growth, both from census and Queensland Statistician's Office, and a lot of our arguments that we've gone to council with, where they've raised concerns about the economic need, has been supported through that kind of knowledge. Again, an example within house, so our property and economics team will often prepare needs assessments support our applications, and they work in conjunction with our spatial analysts to use GIS to best present the data. And as a quick example from a recent project where for a childcare centre in Ashgrove, again looking at the economic and social, particularly the economic need for the childcare centre and how its viability, consolidating catchment area from travel distance to also population data in terms of how young the population is in those in the catchment area, essentially. I suppose next steps. Me, I view planning as a profession that has quite a wide trajectory as the paths you can take. It's more beyond just planning in a private consultancy doing DA or local government. I have quite a few colleagues who work in engineering firms, and then of course transport planning is sort of a niche field of that, as well as environmental planning, community and social planning. Planning law and expert witness reporting is quite prominent these days, particularly for more controversial developments that may get approved or refused. That's often the big part in then taking application planning and environment report and arguing why it should be approved or refused, depending if your position as the appellant. And after that, development and project management. So I mentioned before, from planning consultants perspective, quite a lot of involvement in the project management side, keeping the DA moving forward. But I do have some colleagues from uni who, after a couple of years of planning, have gone to development companies like Stockland, Lendlease, and they are then sitting on the client side, not just looking at one project, but the delivery of, master planned areas like Aura up in Sunshine Coast or Ripley down in Ipswich. And particularly in those roles, having sort of grasp of planning jargon and knowledge is very beneficial for being able to perform that role. I suppose to cap off my presentation, for emerging planners getting into the workforce, we're trying to get experience. Exposure, experience is everything. Trying to get as much exposure as you can will really help once you do leave uni and you're working full time. Personally, for myself, around the time that I was finishing uni, it was really difficult to get, or the job market was a bit slow. But right now, I feel like there's about 1,000 planning jobs out there all the time from students to principal planners. So no shortage of work to be done. Networking events, professional events, whether they're uni or other organisations, so PIA, QIP, UDIA, Property Council of Australia, or PCA, there's often a lot of opportunities to not only meet other planners, but then meet other people you engage with as a planner, so engineers, developers, real estate agents, etc. And then learning events such as this one. I often try and attend a peer seminar once every couple of months, and other learning opportunities where they provide that additional depth to what you may have learnt during your degree, whether it's bachelor's, master's, or doctorate. And on top of that, going away from those learning opportunities, it then gives you the opportunity to then share that knowledge with your colleagues then, which is something that I try and do as much as I can at the time. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. It was especially nice to see the breakdown of the human geography and the physical geography and the technical geography that you use in your role. Our final speaker for this evening is Anton. Anton's in his 4th year of studying a Bachelor of Regional and Town Planning, also at UQ, and is also involved at the moment, I imagine, in UQ OOPS as industry rep. Is that correct? Yeah. He also works 3 days a week at PSA Consulting in Brisbane CBD as an undergraduate planner. He has experience doing development assessments in Queensland and New South Wales and strategic reports for councils and for state government. He's also worked with ASI Planning and Saunders Havel Group early in his degree. Anton also has had a passion for geography from a young age and considers it his best and favourite subject. In 2017, he won equal highest result in Queensland in the Australian Geography competition, which is a nice link back into this evening. Would you like me to leave this slide up for you while you present? Yeah. Alrighty, please welcome Anton.
Yeah, so massive privilege to be speaking here tonight. Yeah, I've got a little bit of experience with the Geographical Society of Queensland in the past through the Australian Geography competition. So yeah, I'm very privileged to be able to take part in that. Yeah, just no slides for me tonight, just me and my voice. So I guess if you're into podcasts, you can have my voice in the background while you're doing something else. So yeah, I guess I'll just get straight into it. Just get my speech up. Yeah, so obviously always had an interest in geography from a young age. I guess pretty much as early as I could read. Instead of looking at comic books and that kind of thing, I'd be looking at maps, which are just lying around the house. I think that's where it started for me. And yeah, just going through primary school, geography was always my favourite subject. And yeah, I think in high school, we had to go into mycareer.gov.au for one of our assignments and basically pick a career off a personality test. And it shot out town planning as a almost 100% match for my personality. And I did not know what urban planning was at the time. So I basically asked around if anyone knew a town planner, and it just happened that my best mate's older sister was working as a town planner. So I called her up at like 8 p.m. on a Wednesday night, so, like firing questions at her about town planning. And yeah, from how she described it, she made it sound like a really interesting career with a lot of opportunities to branch out to different fields, kind of how Alex was saying. And yeah, I think the reality is sort of matched up to that, which has been a relief. So yeah. Yeah, so obviously not to brag, but had that privilege of representing Queensland at the Australian Geography competition a few years ago. So had a bit of interaction with Kath Berg and Margaret McIver and Bernard Fitzpatrick, some members of this organisation. And yeah, definitely that experience of going to South Australia and just doing field measurements at Kangaroo Island, it sort of served to, I guess, really stoke the fire, my passion for geography. I kind of started to think, well, I'm interested in this, so why not pursue it as a career? And yeah, sure enough, went to uni, studying town planning. I guess you'll find that there'll be a lot of repetition with what you learn, but you'll quickly realise that there's a reason those basics are being instilled through the coursework. So try to take it seriously and try to take uni seriously. But you know, as Alex and Anne were saying, like experience is like so important. So be proactive with chasing experience during university. Yeah, so working 3 days a week at PSA consulting in the city. And yeah, it's definitely a challenge to balance university with work. But I think it's just something you got to deal with. And you'll almost find that by working and applying that coursework, it'll kind of refine how you study, and you'll kind of be like, oh, these are the areas which I really need to drill down to. And you'll be able to start having banter with your lecturers about projects and you know, start to tap into all that planning jargon and planning gossip, because it's a relatively small field, urban planning. So you know, you'll start to hear who's who and what's going on, what kind of projects are happening, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, as Alex was saying, it's a very different field, I think, a very different job market to what it was even 5-10 years ago. Because definitely when I was in high school and I was asking people about town planning, you know, I was hearing horror stories about people having to do masters and PhDs just to get into the job market. And now I go on LinkedIn and there's students in second year working at, you know, good companies. So hopefully it stays that way for a little while longer. We'll have to see what happens. I think as COVID sort of taught us, you can never really know what to expect. So you just kind of got to adapt and just be always learning and always building your skill set, and just control what you can control. Yeah, so at PSA, I guess being a mid-sized company, about 30 people, we go through probably not a huge volume of projects, but relatively large, complex projects. So we do a lot of strategic work throughout Queensland and even quite a bit in New South Wales. And we do DAs as well. And then we have a transport team, engineering team, infrastructure team. And I think one of the benefits of being a fairly small company has been that you get to see all the projects that are happening. You can ask questions. A project won't really go through the company without you knowing something about it. So it's relatively easy to just slot into a project. And I think doing a little bit of work in New South Wales, you kind of get to see what their system's like and what Queensland's system is like. Obviously a little bit biased, but I think Queensland's system is a little bit easier to deal with, a little bit better. But I'm sure New South Wales people have a reason why they've structured it that way. And yeah, I think the experience at PSA, I think you learn that deadlines don't go away once you graduate, unfortunately. As Alex was saying to me before, it's just something you've got to deal with. So definitely prioritization of tasks. You're going to be expected to, if you've got a tender due, today, sometimes you're just going to have to jump in and get that done, even if you've got 3 or 4 of your own tasks. So just learning how to jump into a project and, task prioritization. So I guess getting to do work on DAs, it's been a really good learning experience, I think, because DAs are kind of like the bread and butter of town planning. So even if you want to move to a strategic direction or more of a geographic direction or really any direction, you kind of want to work, have done a little bit of work at DAs first, just seeing it as it is a bit of a bread and butter of the industry. And basically any strategic policy that gets drafted is going to influence, DAs on the ground. So you kind of want to know that the policy that you're drafting up is like feasible and, is actually realistic for the urban development industry on the ground. So yeah, and having done stints at ASI and Saunders Havel, it's I guess how they approached things was quite different to PSA. So ASI was a team of about 3 or 4 people, and basically it was getting through a very large volume of DAs with a small team. So, and their only work was at DAs essentially. And then I went to Saunders Havel, who do like basically the whole suite of things. If you drive past any housing estate in suburban Brisbane, there's a chance that Saunders Havel had something to do with it. So that was a real learning opportunity, and just getting to, I guess, work with people who are now like expert witnesses, and some of them are working for development companies like Lend-Lease and even Boral, which is like a cement company. So yeah, and at PSA as well, we've got people who've worked in Qatar at the FIFA World Cup doing their transport strategy. So yeah, getting to bounce ideas off those kinds of people has been a great opportunity. Yeah, so I guess if I was just going to jump into advice, and I've sort of been giving advice throughout, but my first tip would be to make connections. So it's, I think, definitely events like this, Royal Queensland Geographic Society. I'm the exec at the UQ Organisation of Planning Students, and that's a fantastic opportunity for students, probably the most accessible events, I would say, for students. And companies have been really keen to get on board and engage with students at the moment because it is a tough job market. So I'd definitely encourage students to get involved with that. And of course, you've got the Planning Institute of Australia, who put out great content, great seminars. So definitely get to those. You'll network with a lot of people who work in state government, those events in particular, but people from all walks of planning. And Queensland Young Planners, who are like an offshoot of Planning Institute of Australia, just a bit more accessible for planners starting out. Yeah, and obviously UDIA, PCA, Property Council, those kinds of bodies. I haven't had too much to do with them, but I know people who are involved, and you know, they've got a lot out of those experiences. I'd say, yeah, second tip would be to get out of your comfort zone. So I think, you know, being from Brisbane myself, it can be very tempting to sort of just stick with what you know. And yeah, because we've got it quite good in Brisbane at the moment, you know, building up to the Olympics and all that. But, you know, common advice I hear from planners who've been around for a while is, you know, do a stint in Central Queensland, you know, do a stint at Isaac, you know, do a stint at Ipswich even, because working at these kinds of places, you're going to be working with a smaller team, so you're going to have access to a greater share of the workload, if that makes sense. If you're at, you know, an organisation like Brisbane City Council, there's a chance that you might end up in a niche, which is not a bad thing. But if you're just starting out, you might want access to a broader suite of what's going on. So I can recommend thinking about that. Yeah, and definitely engaging with any opportunity you get at uni. So I've lost count of the number of events I've been to where, you know, none of my mates wanted to come along, so it was just me. But, you know, by the end of the night, you have made like one or two connections, and, you know, things can just lead to another. The first stint I got at ASI, I was just attending a webinar, and basically, towards the end of the night, Craig, who's the director at ASI, just said, you know, drop your email in the chat if and I can send you an opportunity. And I think maybe 2 people saw that, and I dropped my email in, and, you know, 3 weeks later I was starting at ASI. So yeah, like just sort of being aware and taking initiative can take you a long way. And yeah, I think just being realistic as well. I think is just to be realistic. And then if you're in uni, you might have to, you know, churn out an assignment on top of that. It's just a reality that some people have to deal with. And yeah, just you'll get through it. It's not forever. And I think yeah, when you start working, you know, when you start working as full-time planner, your workload's going to increase. So you're going to have constant deadlines. So that's something to think about. And yeah, trying to think if there's anything else. I think I had more to say, but that's all I've got. So yeah, I hope you got something out of that.
We'll move on to the next section, I suppose, for this evening, our Q&A. I'd like to invite our 3 speakers to come back up our stage area. And I might step over to the side and try and get the 3 of you, if you could stand along this section so we can get you on the camera for our online audience. Perfect. I'd like to start us off with kind of a setting the scene sort of question, and just ask each of you, what does a day in your life as a planner look like? Like, what are your daily tasks? What's like the sort of thing that you could expect to be working on, or projects you might be thinking about in your kind of day to day? We might work our way from Alex down to Anton.
I normally start my day with a coffee each morning, as most people do. I suppose on a day to day, it's really quite variable. We have a pretty comprehensive system at Urbis, particularly in the planning team, for everyone can see what projects we're working on, how much time we plan to spend working on those projects. So I suppose you can also look at it from on a daily basis, like I'll spend the morning sort of easing into a bit of planning work where if I have any site reviews to do or any due diligence advice to provide, I'll usually try and lead off with that first thing of the morning, as well if I'm trying to chase after someone, whether it's council, client, an engineer who's been ducking my calls. I just call them first thing at 9:30 to try and get them while they're still fresh. But I suppose, yeah, and that once I sort of get around midday is when I really start to get in the groove. And if I do have any report writing to do, I try and spend as much time of an afternoon as I can. But it varies from day to day. I think I'll get one day a week where my actual daily plan will get achieved, because without a doubt, about an hour into the day, there'll be something that blows up with one project or another, and then I suppose a big part of it is just the sort of balancing act around that. And me, particularly like with the work with what we do, whether we're engaging with or working with a senior consultant or an associate director or director, a big part of that, being able to balance that workload, is just a communication, just saying like, hey, I can't take on this new project. I've got all these other ones to take care of, which I found, particularly going from small company of like 4 or 5 people where I just got to sign new work because there was always work to be done, to a larger company where I really wanted to prove myself. Probably the first few months there was a bit of burnout there just because I'd probably taken on a bit too much work. But then from there, being able to effectively communicate that both on a daily basis, but then also long term, looking at 2, 3, 4 weeks ahead of time, knowing what I had to work.
Nice. And
Yeah, as Alex mentioned, it depends on the project I'm working. So my daily routine is like, first from coffee to half an hour, I give it to how I want to plan my day according to the projects I have. And then sometimes it happens that I'm on site all day. Sometimes it happens I'm in my desk job, like writing a report or, doing some modeling work or doing some GIS work. So it completely depends on the project that I'm working on. And of course, and the company I'm working with is, they have like brilliant people. They allow a very good work-life balance. So it's like, so it is because they like the company is like so good with this work life and they're so dedicated, like they like the employees should have a good work-life balance, that I'm able to juggle between my UQs and then PIA, QIP stuff, and then all the university course and then itself and the job. So like 4 or 5, I'm like stepping into 4 or 5 things just because they are so, they understand. And yes, so my day-to-day work depends on the project that I'm working on. So it completely depends on the project.
cool. And
Yeah, so it's pretty rare that I'll get to work and actually start working. Like I'll often be answering emails for at least the first 20-30 minutes of the day. And that's just a habit that I get into, while I'm sharp, while I'm in a good mood, engaging with clients and liaising with people. And yeah, I'm quite big on planning out my day. So that's often the second thing I'll do is honestly just getting out a pen and paper, or I'll have a Google Doc even, and just type out all the stuff I need to get done. So I'll usually get in around 9 a.m, 9 to 9:30, answering emails, planning out my day. I get maybe 2.5 hours of work done. Then usually grab lunch and then back into it. I'm not sure what it's like at Urbis or at Point 8, but PSA, I'm sure it's similar. They like really regiment time. So I'll be saying, this is how much time we expect this task to take, and if it's going to take longer, just let us know. We'll figure something out. And I think for it's going to look different for what stage of career you're at, because obviously being an undergrad, one of the less experienced in the room, so my pay, my hourly rate's a little bit more affordable. So manual tasks, I'll get given those. For people in the middle, they'll probably get given a project, get given a certain amount of time, and then work on that project. Might get 70 hours to work on a GIS analysis, for instance. And then for the senior most employees, they might not be doing as much of the bread and butter kind of work. They might be working less hours on each project, but being ready to take on new work, speak to clients, that kind of thing. So yeah.
Yeah, lovely. It sounds like planning and organizing out your day is something that's very consistent across the three, which I suppose shouldn't surprise me since you're planning. I might open up to the audience. Does anyone in our audience have?
We actually have
Questions?
2 questions online.
All right, we'll take it online first, and then if you've got some, we'll love to hear them.
Our first question is from Ashley. How do you each treat the relationship between architects, environmental officers, planners, and engineers? Do you have any effective communication tips towards those different types of roles?
I suppose from my experience, I haven't had to deal too much with environmental officers for the projects I've been working on. I suppose environmental officers don't just relate to like environmental management or like ecology. I suppose it also extends to Brisbane City Council has environmental officers to deal with sort of noise attenuation, etc. I think for the most part, it's just my role, sort of project management side of it for planning, where we do have those sort of conflicting issues or that arise. It is just the communication is key, and as planners, I suppose, as I alluded to earlier, we sort of have that jack of all trades, master of none skill, where we don't understand those areas all fully, but we do have enough of an idea that when an engineer says, for any reason that this aspect isn't possible, we're able to then go back to the architect and say, this isn't going to work from a structural perspective or due to flooding. We need to rethink this. And again, as well as that, going from council back to the client and the client's architects or whatever, being able to take information that we receive from council. If we receive a 10-page information request on an application asking to provide more justification or provide updated plans for reasons X, Y, and Z, it's just a matter of then taking all that and condensing it down into something that not only the client will be able to read and understand, because sometimes if you just send them a 10-page information request, they freak out because they have no idea what all the words mean. But as well as that, it's a matter of being able to extrapolate the key aspects from that information and to go back to the architect to say, hey, you need to provide these kind of breaks of form. Go back to the engineer and say, you need to provide updated modelling for stormwater drainage, and then to go back to whoever it may be. So I suppose as planners, we're sort of that when we are placed in the project manager role, because there are project managers that often do a lot of stuff that aren't planners, they just specialise solely in that. But from when we are assuming that role on top of the planning, and we are the central conduit, so it's just a matter of being able to extrapolate what's being said, all the information that's been provided, and then putting it in a manner that everyone can understand. When you give to
I don't really have to deal with the architects in day-to-day in my life because I'm transport, purely transport. So yeah, I have to deal a lot with the engineers, specifically the traffic engineers. So yeah, on my day-to-day life, it's just to make the engineers understand the point of view. Sometimes I feel very difficult. They don't understand why, like, they don't understand the perspective, like perspective of planner. So communicating those ideas, those things to an engineer, to a traffic engineer, is one of the challenges that I'm kind of facing at work at the moment. So yeah, I'm learning, and then but then yeah, I hope I think the communication, there is a big sometimes there is a big communication gap between what the planner want to say and make the engineer understand, and what the engineer is trying to say and make the planner understand. So sometimes there are gaps which I find yeah, which is a challenging factor. So yes,
Work in progress.
yeah.
Always learning. Do you have anything to add, Anton?
Yeah, so pretty much just basically adding on to what Alex and Anne have said. It's a great question, Ashley. I'd say it looks a little bit different at each company. This is actually the bit that I missed in my presentation, so I'm glad you asked it. So planning is interdisciplinary by nature, and yeah, as has been said, like we're kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. So we can pretend to know a lot. We can pretend to know about a lot of different fields without necessarily having to give the advice in each field, having to be the qualified expert giving advice in each of those fields. And yeah, it'll look different where you work. So for instance, if you're at ASI and you're doing DAs, you're going to be dealing with a lot of architectural drawings and a lot of engineering kind of content. And then at Saunders Havel, which is a fairly large company, it's going to be segmented into each department. So you might not have to touch environmental or engineering kind of content, because that'll be done for you. And I'm sure it's the same at councils as well. And at councils, it's an interesting dynamic, because you'll be kind of, there can be a little bit of a pecking order in terms of what gets prioritized in any given project. So yeah, that could be an interesting dynamic. And then at PSA, where we do a little bit of a mix of things. The thing I'm dealing with the most would be architectural drawings. And sometimes you look at something like, we're dealing with an agribusiness project in New South Wales, and you look at the architectural drawings for all different structures, and you're like, it's a new language, this may as well be written in a different language, because it's just like trying to wrap your head around it. And yeah, I've looked a little bit at engineering kind of content as well, which oddly enough, probably a little bit different to what Anne was saying. I actually found the engineers easier to understand the architects sometimes. Got a very robust, concise way of communicating. But yeah, there can be challenges when, as planners, we want to be visionary. We want to have all these green visions, and I'm sure the geographic professionals would as well. And the engineers, just kind of like, how can we make this the most functional thing possible? And so yeah, that'd be my thoughts.
Perfect. And question 2, does a planner ever feel compromised by developers or project managers when and if they do not feel that their project is ethically sustainable?
Really good question. To a degree, I know this was something that particularly at Oversight, I think across the field in general, looking at development in areas such as power, like clean power and infrastructure. I know, I suppose, with the new generation of plans coming through, I think that's probably much more of a consideration. I was really looking to try and start having the ring for sustainable sort of projects, so wind, solar, etc. Not that we do many or any projects associated with anything like mining or natural resources. For my own role, that's not as prevalent, but looking at companies like engineering companies like GHD, Arab, where they are going to get those kind of roles, jobs regardless. So I think although there may be those sort of conflictions of the planner on a project that you may not necessarily agree with, if you are a planning consultant at somewhere like GHD doing the social impact assessment for something like a natural resource project, I think that is when you have the opportunity to work in a project, and inevitably it's going to happen, but you can at least try and make the outcome as good as possible. And it seems like, well, it seems like a bit of an odd thing to say. There is at least that potential to try and make sure that the outcome is as good as it can be, even if it is still not inherently a great outcome. And again, like similar sort of fashion, like environmental managers working on mining sites, like seems like a bit of a paradox unto itself, I guess. But ultimately, they're there to try and make sure that the outcomes of mining operations are as least detrimental as possible. But certainly, I know, like at Urbis, if we were asked to do a project for like a cigarette manufacturing factory or something, I think we would turn that down just because there is a line in the sand that everyone does have. I suppose as planners, we can choose whether to work on that project or not. I suppose it just comes down to your sort of natural preferences or history on what you want to do.
I remember an incident side of doing traffic impact assessment. Yeah, just like Alex said, sometimes there might be cases where we feel that things are getting compromised, but we do our best to we only can do what we can we can do. So yeah, so we try to do our best, but sometimes yes, there are times when you feel like things are not the way it should be. But yes, of course, you have a choice, and everyone has a choice. And being in Point 8, I have learned that being ethical is the most important thing rather than compromising. So I also follow this policy. Yes, there are times when we have this ethical issues, but then we have a choice. We definitely have a choice.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the answer is yeah, there'll definitely be ethical challenges that will come up, and I guess the way I like to think about it in a positive way is we're kind of balancing those ESD principles, so that ecological sustainability principles. You're constantly being taught that in uni. So balancing the environment, balancing economic interests, balancing social interests. And I think as a planner, you're looking for the best outcome. We're looking for an outcome that can meet needs in all of those three dimensions. And I don't think you're ever going to get a perfect outcome. There's a common saying that an architect's dream is an engineer's worst nightmare. And I think a planner's dream is often going to be, can be a developer's nightmare. And an environmentalist dream might not be ideal for a developer either, just like a developer's dream is not necessarily going to be great for the environment or for planning. So I think I'm always looking to get an outcome that's, integrating interests in all those three principles, and just trying to do the best you can. There will be projects where you're thinking, I haven't had to deal with a really terrible project, but I would say there are projects where like, maybe this shouldn't happen here, but at the end of the day, you've got to do the best that you can for the day.
Alrighty. We might open up to questions from the floor to any of our in-person audience members.
On site? Oh,
On site,
dear.
yeah.
Okay.
Do you have any
Well,
questions?
yes, I have a comment or a question or something. I had sort of lived in very dread of urban planning because I see that whatever rationality there is in urban planning, it's always totally overruled by the imperatives of population growth and power, the political power that gives developers. And I live in terror that I live in West End and that it's just going to turn into Kangaroo Point in my lifetime. And there's nothing I can do about it, but I totally don't want it to happen. But yeah, but it's going to be a product of urban planning, you know, powered by population growth, powered by the capitalist power of the property industry.
Mm.
Comment on that?
I suppose, are any of you seeing the pressures of population growth in the projects that you're working on? And pushback, I suppose, or fears represented by the community if you're doing any kind of community consultation in those projects?
To an extent, because none of the projects I've been involved with or heavily involved with have had any sort of community engagement or haven't had the need to, perhaps. But certainly I do see where you're coming from in terms of like community concerns for development. It's a very tricky thing to juggle as a planner, especially when you're trying to balance, especially when you're trying to meet the expectations of your client, and particularly depending on certain developments where they are impact accessible. For example, there are the opportunities for members of the public to make submissions on certain applications, and depending on how many you receive and then also the nature of those submissions can ultimately sway a decision either for or against anything certain. But yeah, it is something that is, I suppose, difficult to be mindful. It's hard to be mindful of when your role is to try and get an outcome for your client. It's and conversely, where particularly like colleagues I have who work more in the community management, community engagement, community planning area, it does feel like it's more empowering. So like an example of community engagement work I did was for Loreto College in Ballarat, Victoria, and that was work to sort of help with their education facilities brief for a secondary campus, and that involved like surveys with students, alumni, staff, parents, local residents, and I suppose, and it's also harking back to my earlier slide with the engagement work in Indonesia. Those kind of moments we are able to do the actual ground level planning stuff. It is certainly, I suppose, you do get the sense of fulfillment, and you do get the sense of you know, you're planning for what the community wants. So I understand like the sort of concerns that you have in the sense that you address the concerns of the community are being outweighed by what is a crushing issue for not just Southeast Queensland, but for Queensland as a whole and for Australia as a whole. It is a real tricky thing, and an aspect to that which Herbs has been involved with is like, you know, looking at particularly property prices and that, where we can try and promote more build to rent projects to try and at least have some kind of product in the market where it's not necessary, it's not just being owned by a landlord who's jacking up the prices every 12 months. It's more stable, but then again, the argument to that is there's not enough of that in the market, and it's not anticipated to be getting built, a lot of the approvals for them anyway, until 2025, 2026. And as well as that, like I have a colleague who is a planner who has a background in property economics, and his argument is that it'll never solve the crisis because current build to rent projects, they have like one bedroom apartments being rented for $400 or $450 a week. So it's one of those things where demand is ultimately always going to, the need for housing and infrastructure like that is always going to be the driving factor. But I think in reality, there's a lot of catching up to do before we're at a level where they can sort of stabilize and be a bit more sustainable. It's, yeah.
I was involved with the West End Community Association. For a long time there, they fought against property developments that were not part of the neighbourhood plan at all, and they were totally not wanted. They were just excessive. But the process didn't seem, the rules didn't seem to matter. Now we've put together thousands of submissions in opposition to a project, and they go ahead anyway.
Yeah.
Or the association would take it to the planning court, and they'd just get outspent all the time. And so they just gave up after a while. They just organised festivals now. It was just too expensive and too unproductive to continue with it.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I think West End is one of the community like which is very aware of their rights and
We have a lot of
better
plans.
than Wollongong, I think. Because it's very near to the city and it is I know what you're trying to like it is anyways going to get engulfed at one point of time. It's going to because it's so near to the city and it's has such good public transportation, and especially people if you see the demographic of West End, the majority of the like now things are the demographic of West End is more of professionals, couples. So whatever apartments that you're trying to build is basically for that group of demography. So yes, I have read about a lot about that that project called The Village, which has a lot of controversies involved in it. But yes, there are times when communities are consulted, but then things get compromised. There are yeah.
I suppose another point to add, I suppose it could be expanded from West End to like South Brisbane as well. Certainly in terms of Australian cities, West End, South Brisbane for a long time was a bit of an anomaly compared to like Sydney and Melbourne for CBD areas, and that intensification of land use didn't happen for so long. A big part of obviously the industrial history along South Bank and West End, particularly like along the river, South Bank was a major part of that, which is still somewhat evident today. There's obviously the busy glass cycling centre and the milk
Milk factory, yeah.
the milk
It's
factory.
all highly flood-prone land.
And it's all hard to find, which is again
Very interesting.
again it harkens back to the thing of that was developed on that land. A lot of the industrial development happened there prior to any sort of recorded knowledge, or floods happened in I think there was a major flood back in the late 1800s or something, but 1893, and then they just thought, well, that's a 1 in 100 year flood, and then 1974, and then 2011, and 2022. Yeah, exactly. And then and I suppose another argument of that is, well, you remove those uses and what do we put there instead? A floodplain area. Is it wise to put more residential development there? Probably not, but I'm not that I'd see any development going there for any time soon, because
Yes, there is.
oh, like where
A 90-story unit block.
oh yeah, but
Isn't that-
I'm also where like the glass factory and that is, because I think there's a similar site back on Donkin Street in West End, which was the old gas stripping site, and they had approvals for like the 8-story apartment buildings there, and then realised there was excessive levels of tar seeping from underground into the river. So that's a developer's nightmare thinking about the cost of that. So exactly. So it is something that's it's certainly a bit of an anomaly, and there's reasons why it has sort of remained, or why it remained undeveloped for so long. But I suppose as the time marches on, sort of bound to catch up eventually.
Yeah, I think I can't really add too much to what's already been said. It is one of the, at least in uni, the example of West End comes up a lot. And I think, as Anne was saying, it's a community that's very mobilised. very aware of their rights, very protective of that West End character. And yeah, I actually live in West End, so I know what it's like. I know what the traffic's like. I know what the lack of green space is like. And yeah, I think I see, as I was kind of saying earlier, there are those three pillars of sustainability, so the social, economic, environmental. And I think with that complexity in mind, there was never going to be a perfect outcome for West End, as harsh as it sounds. It's I think being that close to the city, it was inevitable that the developers were sort of going to go in. And I think I definitely miss the old West End. I definitely miss how it was. But I think there was just an inevitability about it. So the same issues, I think what's happened in West End are actually emblematic of what's going to happen in a lot of other areas. So I can use an example, like I won't say the place, but it's a town in the mid-north coast of New South Wales, and they're doing a lot of community consultation at the moment, and it's very similar issues to what came up in West End, funnily enough. Overdevelopment, just completely changing the character of the place. And I think, as you said, that politicisation of planning at times. So, we're sort of hearing a lot in the news now. It's become a hot topic issue of housing affordability, and every solution under the sun has been thrown at it to try and solve the problem. So I think, yeah, it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens going forward.
Did we have any more questions from online?
That's all from online.
All right. We've hit 8 o'clock, so we might wrap it up for this evening. Thank you very much for sharing your perspectives with us tonight and your thoughts and responses to the questions. It's been really great to hear about your pathways and the ways that geography connects into planning, and also just to hear a little bit more about planning as an industry. I know one of the kind of strengths of geography is quite a broad disciplinary area, is that we all sort of get sectioned into our niches, and every now and again it's really nice to hear from someone who's kind of working one of those different areas. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just wrap us up by sharing, get myself in the frame, a few of our upcoming events. 2nd of May is our monthly lecture slot. We have the Thomson Medal presentation and Thomson Oration, which looks to be a really interesting kind of case study look at the social life of Australian nature, focusing on the Barker, the Darling River, and the topic of ecocide. That should be a really interesting presentation. I think there's still a few registration spots available. Our next Geography and Conversation event, which is kind of more of a discussion-based evening, will be on the Transportation Infrastructure Corridor on Gold Coast to Sunshine Coast, sort of relevant to this kind of topic of planning tonight, transport planning. So if you're interested in that, the registration is available on the website. And for young geographers, we have a couple of things coming up over the next few months. We are still sorting out the date for our next careers evening sort of discussion. It'll be towards the end of May, start of June. There'll be some events going up on our Facebook group and also on the RGSQ website when that's ready. And if you have any interest in a camping trip that we have coming up, come see me or send me a message online to register your interest for that. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to presenters again. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.